All right, Ken, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
here on Zoom, as we've been seem to have been conducting our lives for the past few months.
Yeah,
So Steph, hi, thank you too for setting this up.
Good afternoon.
Yeah,
yeah, good to see you.
good. Yeah, we'd love to take this chance to kind of catch up with you, and you've certainly been busy.
Mhm.
Uh, number of wonderful recordings. I know that you have coming up very soon a an online festival, the Catalytic Sound Festival. So maybe I thought we could just get in and by talking about some of the stuff you've been doing over the past few months, since our lives have changed so much and we find ourselves on Zoom.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, it's very strange on a lot of levels, obviously. But in regards to music, it's strange because I've been so busy. I kind of expected that with all the concerts being put on hold for the foreseeable future, certainly in the States, and with touring, there's so many questions about what that will be, if it will be, when it will be. I kind of thought that this period would be very slow for me, and I'd be able to catch up on a lot of projects that have been kind of hovering in the background since usually I'm on the road about 6 months a year. But it's been incredibly busy, and I'm not. I mean, I know that it's been with recording projects and organizing the Catalytic Sound Festival, working on the streaming service that we're developing and stuff like that. But I am a bit surprised that I'm working every day just as much as I would be if things were, let's say, under normal circumstances, whatever, whatever that might mean. It's just that the work is really different. So I'm thankful that I am so busy because it's kind of giving me things to focus on, creative activities to put time and energy into. Because otherwise, when I start contemplating the situation for music and live performances, I have to be honest, it's very discouraging, and I feel
And
psychologically. Hmm?
can you shed some more light on what you actually do? So you're not
Oh yeah, yeah,
touring
yeah.
anymore,
Sorry.
you're not
Yeah.
traveling anymore, you're not performing anymore. So what is happening that keeps you busy?
Well, on the personal side, there's a lot of work on finishing up recordings. We've been issuing a second series of duo recordings through the audiographic label. Most recently, the album with Fred Lomberg Home, but there have been others and more to come. One with Christoph Kurtzman and one with Jaap Blanc and Lou Malazzi. So that's like getting material out and dealing with that process. There's a large group recording the fifth in the Momentum series. I think there's 8 people in that, nine including the video work, and that's a huge. I have to work on that today after our interview. Try to finish up the mix on that because it involves drums, horns, cello, bass, and 2 sets of electronics and recording. So it's very complex in terms of the mix. So there's like that activity, which is more like just personal work. But a lot of work has been going into the Catalytic Sound collective. That's been important, has become more important for me, particularly in the last 2 years, in terms of shifting a thing that was originally like an online record store
Mhm.
and, in a sense, a distributor for some of the labels involved with the music that are run by musicians. But in the last 2 years, I've become a lot more devoted to the idea of trying to find ways to create income streams for experimental musicians involved in the collective, and try to figure out different ways to do that, and develop it more as a cooperative than just like, okay, we have a bunch of musicians who have a bunch of recordings, we promote that work and we try to generate income for them so they can continue to make the work. um, there's been huge changes before this whole period with the pandemic, and certainly they've become more severe now that there are no concerts. But the United States has never been that supportive of the arts in general, but certainly more experimental and cutting edge work uh, in music and visual arts, writing, anything. I mean, it's not a super supportive environment for that activity. So people doing that work have had to kind of find their own ways to generate revenue. And there have been big changes in Europe since I started touring there. countries that put a lot of money into the arts, like Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany. They've cut more and more back on the arts and have adopted more and more the, let's say, the economic model of the United States, where they're trying to cut down on taxes to make people, quote unquote, happier about how much taxes they're paying. But they're also cutting on programs, and the first thing to go is the arts because they're not seen as essential. So trying to figure out for even the European members, like how do we sustain income? What can we do to generate revenue? Has been like a real focus as a group to think about it more as like a model for musicians to consider uh, as a platform instead of like working individually, trying to work together and have like a larger voice because of that.
And
And that's been really fascinating.
can you give an explanation on the festival itself? So how will that work in practice?
Yeah, I mean, originally we had planned for like about a year to do a festival in Chicago, and like kind of a standard festival, inviting some people definitely from around the U.S., but also Terry from the X and Paul Nelson Love were going to come from Europe. We were going to have 3 days of music, possibly four, and it would be structured as an independent festival, kind of modeled after, let's say, the uh, Vels Music Unlimited Festival, which is one of my favorite festivals. But as soon as COVID hit, that all changed, like basically overnight. And initially, um, I mean, initially it was thought that maybe things would be possible in July. Like we're talking March. It's like, okay, well, let's see what happens. Like there was a lot of talk. Okay, in the summer things resume. So there was a period where we're trying to figure out what that meant. But pretty quickly it became clear that that was not going to happen. And the Experimental Sound Studio in Chicago almost immediately started the quarantine concerts, which is an incredible series, both musically but also as a strategy to raise income for musicians while they're not working. I mean, they've had, I mean, the amount of money they've raised for musicians, and also, their devotion is wired into the name. It's experimental music. So for people who have always been kind of on the periphery or on the margins, to have support system put in place that are actually functional and immediately, the way that ESS did it was incredible. So we started looking at that, and because I work with them all the time through the option series that I help co-curate, I was very aware of what they're doing and looking at that as a model. So the festival, which takes place Friday, Saturday, and Sunday coming up on July 10th, 11th, 12th, it's going to be wound into the series that ESS is doing. It's going to be part of the quarantine concerts, but it will also be a standalone event. So we're using some of their technology, and they've helped us a lot with the technical aspects. But we're also trying to do things a little bit differently, and we've tried to learn through the last few months, like looking at other kinds of performances that have been happening all online. Mm-hmm. I mean, once COVID hit, like we had grants, talking about raising money through systems in the United States. We'd applied for a bunch of grants to have income to not only pay the musicians but cover costs. There's a lot of expenses. When things became so drastic with the pandemic, all those grants, understandably, were shifted towards getting money to the individual musicians, and people could apply to get like COVID relief income. So those grants disappeared almost immediately. So we're like, okay, how do we do this? We can do donations, which we're going to be doing like they do us with a quarantine concert. We had an incredible sponsor, a person based in Chicago, who's helped support a huge number of projects involving improvised music, and he gave us some money, which is covering the nuts and bolts of the expenses of paying people to do specific jobs, design a web platform for the festival and things like that. So all the donations that we collect over the 3 days will be divided evenly by among all the participants. There's about 30 people who will be involved, either doing music or designing visuals.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, looking at the looking at the program of the event, just the first day on Friday, you have Terry X, Ab Bars, Ig Henneman, Jacques Blanc, yourself, Paul Nilsson Love, Frode Gerstad, Sylvie Courvoisier. I mean, you have this incredible list of musicians playing.
Yeah.
So I imagine, technically, are people kind of coming in from wherever they are to join you?
We're doing lots of different things, and again, based on what we observed over the weeks, like what things we thought were most exciting. I mean, initially, a lot of the stream concerts were all solo performances, and usually, like in the case of the quarantine concerts, maybe like a half dozen musicians playing one at a time. And granted, like in the situation we're in, having any music take place is like remarkable. Um, for me personally, and I think for other musicians too, it's like so much of music is made in collaboration. You know, you're working with other people, and so even though the solo performances, which are kind of necessary in quarantine situations, I mean, it's a way of performing, but it also becomes very static. I mean, you're asking people to watch these performances usually on a computer screen or maybe on their phone even, and it's an alternative, but it's a challenging thing to ask someone to watch for hours these relatively visually static performances. So we wanted to see if it would be possible to get more sets of activity with more than one musician. And because things have kind of moved forward in Europe, one of the things that we realized is, well, first of all, there's a whole audience in Europe. So let's make sure we have concerts during the day in Chicago, so they're at a time when people can see them in Europe. So each day we're doing concerts at 1 o'clock Central Time. So in Europe, the shows are at 8, and both the musicians aren't up at 4 o'clock in the morning trying to play a show, and then the audience there can access the performances too. And then we're doing evening shows each day as well. And in a bunch of cases, we were like, well, initially, do we do music where you've got people improvising in parallel, and we're in different places, like someone in Chicago, someone in Brooklyn, someone in, I don't know, Belgium, you know, let's say Antwerp, I don't know what, definitely in Amsterdam. And so there was thinking behind that, but then it became clear, like, for example, the first set of the first day on Friday is a trio performance with Abbar Zig Henneman and Terry X, and they'll be playing together in the same space, so physically distanced, which is more feasible in Europe because the EU is way ahead of the US on its progress overcoming the pandemic, and at least you know, getting it reined in. So we're having a bunch of performances like that. So there's not only going to be solo performances. We're trying to use visuals to make it more dynamic to watch. There's a performance, for example, with Luke Stewart on bass and a friend of his doing like a simultaneous film. So you won't be watching Luke perform, you'll be seeing the film, and it's like a soundtrack to that video. So there's things like that as well. So we're trying to take all that into account. There's going to be some performances that will be, let's say, like a Cajun experience where you have simultaneous activity for a duration, but the people are probably going to be listening to each other, but there's delays in the timing, so it's not going to be accurate time. So there's a performance with Ben Hall, Bonnie Jones, and I'm spacing on the third person right now, but they're going to be playing together in separate locations, and that sound will be a field of activity as opposed to like tied together in a conventional performance. So we're trying to do as many different kinds of things like that as we can to overcome.
Oops, sorry.
No.
It's hard when we're online to not step on.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So Steph, sorry before as well. So in a sense, a lot of this, there's some possibilities here that maybe weren't possible before doing this by video.
Yeah, I mean that's
a
the
broader
thing.
range.
Exactly. I mean, you know, we were going to do a conventional festival, so to speak, an improvised music festival, and you kind of like, you don't even realize you're holding on to models that exist for something that's not possible now. So for example, like the original plan was to do everything streamed in real time. So, Terry X and Andy Moore are playing a duo, and the idea was, okay, they play that duo at the time in the time slot, and then we go to the next performance, and etc. But then we realized, well, that's not like some people have a hard time streaming things live. Like the technology is tricky for them, or they don't have like really great, like a great camera, good way to record. So some of them asked if they could record ahead of time and get the thing, like their performance the way they wanted it to be, and then send us the file. And it was like, yeah, of course. And then we realized, well, everyone can do that. Like, so a lot, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, it's not like a conventional festival where the people walk on stage and then they do the performance. Like all the things that are going to take place are, like world premieres. So it's all new music going out to people, but we're trying to take advantage of what we can utilize now. So for example, we couldn't afford to have it's like 8 musicians from Europe play on the festival because there wouldn't be the budget to fly them to Chicago. Now we can have everybody in the co-op perform, including some additional musicians like the players in Marker and Bonnie Jones, for example. And so it's like, okay, what can we do? What can we take advantage of in this situation and utilize those possibilities as best we can? And what it's showing, and I think what is going to end up happening when we get to the other side of this pandemic, hopefully as soon as possible, is it's going to change the way people access music. So for example, I was talking to Ab Bars just a week ago and interviewing him, and we're always talking about music, like what's next, what's happening now, what's going to happen, like, what does touring look like, concerts look like. And he told me that the BIM House is going to start doing concerts in the beginning of August. And so I was like, okay, what's that going to look like? Because like here, there's some places that are having live music, but horn players and singers can't participate because of the problems with COVID. But there, I was going to play. And so it's like, okay, the BIM House is a pretty big stage, so they're going to be spaced out pretty far, I guess. The room will be less than half full, and they'll do like a set, clear the room. I don't know that means they're going to wipe things down or what, but then they'll have another audience. The ticket prices are higher, and they're going to stream things with multiple cameras.
Right.
Now, in the future, if things kind of return to some sort of normal, they'll probably do the concerts the way they did before at the BIM House, but I would bet they're going to keep the streaming going. And I would bet that people can donate, like now people are donating money to watch those streams, so that money goes to the musicians. I think when those things are put in place, that's going to continue because a lot of people can't be in Chicago to see a concert, for example, or in Brussels or in Berlin. But to see this music take place, that's going to be wired into the way people are doing things now. And I think that's going to carry forward. And that's just like one kind of example of like, okay, how is stuff going to change? And what we learn now about communication and performing, how that's going to go forward for the scene is going to be very interesting. And I think it's going to open up a bunch of doors that weren't there before. I mean, just the Zoom meetings or Skype meetings that take place like this, the three of us are in totally different cities, and the way we communicate now, this is normal.
And
businesses use, yeah, exactly.
Question from an audience perspective. I want to watch the festival. What do I do? How do I connect?
Oh, with this particular festival?
Yes.
The CatalyticSound.com website will have a front page that directs everybody to different parts of the festival, to the streaming as it exists. So people can just go there and pick up the beginning of the festival or come in when they're free. But the concerts start at 1 p.m. Central Time. At around 3 p.m. Central, there'll be a panel discussion each day with different topics. And then the concerts will resume at 7 p.m. Central Time. And I'm pretty sure, because all this stuff is going through assistance with ESS, they keep the performances of the quarantine concerts archived for about 4 or 5 days. Okay. So if people can't catch like let's say you're in Brussels and it's too late to catch the evening concerts, those sets should be available at ESS, and all that information will be easy to find on the
So
catalog.
afterward, it will not be available anymore. So you cannot expect.
Yeah, after a certain period, they archive everything,
Right.
and all these performances will be archived. But people will be able to access this stuff, during the period that the festival is taking place, so they can catch things that they miss.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we could, I'd like to actually go back to the Catalytic Sound label for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So Catalytic Sound, you started that. That was you, right? You were one of the founding members.
Yeah, initially it started from discussions with Peter Broadsman, Paul Nelson Love, Max Gustafson, and Joe McPhee and myself, because we were touring all the time. And you'll bring records on tour to sell, but you can't bring everything. It's like, especially someone like Paul who tries to bring everything, he even can't bring everything. So there was always records that we didn't have. We usually bring the newest things because people didn't have those, but there would always be at every concert someone saying, "Oh, do you have such and such a record? We really try to get this, but I can't find it anywhere." And we're all working with small labels. Paul and I have our own label, and usually it's like one person, two people maybe running the label. So the people running them have limited resources and ability to get things out. They do the best they can, but there's always issues with distribution because of the reality that we're small, so to speak, with grand schemes, but still small. And I got tired of talking about it. It's like, we should try to do something. We should do something. It's like, well, look, I've got a basement in Chicago. Let's just get our catalogs or discographies together, and we'll create like a mail order, because people can get the stuff online. We can create a store. And basically that was the idea. I have zero understanding of what a small business meant. I mean, I didn't even know I needed a business license, a city license to have a business. I didn't know how my taxes were going to be changed by having a small business. I mean, I knew nothing. I just thought, well, okay, we have some records and we sell them, and that went for a little while, and I learned a lot the hard way, and still am learning a lot the hard way. But we brought in some more people because it was clear that Paul and I were generating the most income, and the understanding on that was we had our own labels. So we were putting copies of records directly to Catalytic, whereas if someone put out a new record on a label, let's say Marx did, very often the musicians get paid in copies, like artist copies. They don't get a fee for doing the recording. So they get, I don't know, let's say 50 copies of the record, and that's their payment for doing the record. Well, obviously, if someone sells those copies themselves, they're going to get more income than if they send it to a distributor, because Catalytic Sound is on one hand a distribution service for the artists involved. Because Catalytic needs to be paid. So basically it's a 50-50 split on income, net income. So Catalytic gets half of the money made after expenses, and the artist gets half the money. So often the musicians involved, they wouldn't get us artist copies that we could sell. They'd be slow in getting us copies because they could make more money per unit. But the thing is that what we can do at Catalytic is do a lot of promotion that they can't do. They can sell more of the copies because we can get them out to everybody. We take care of the shipping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So looking at Paul and I, we realized, okay, what we need to do is bring in more people if this is going to survive. Because the initial period, it was very, very rocky. It was like not easy going. And I was doing everything and had a manager that would do the shipping. Plus I was like on the road half a year. So it was like, I'm trying to maintain a thing which becomes more complex than I ever thought it would be. And if it was going to survive, we need to have more income generated to keep the Catalytic business going, because it is a business. It's not a not-for-profit. So we brought in a bunch of musicians that had their own record labels, like Terry and Andy, for example, Nate Woolley, Joe Morris, with the idea that, okay, they're going to give us copies of their records as they come out because we're helping distribute them, and they see the logic involved, and we don't have to convince them. If you give us the records, we'll help make money for you. It seems counterintuitive how many conversations and emails have had to be sent to the musicians to say, hey, if you give us records, we'll make money for you. But sometimes it's complicated. So that was like the next round. And then a couple years ago, as I mentioned, I got way more interested in the idea of creating a real cooperative and really thinking more creatively about how we can generate money for people. And the thing that tipped it off for me and was like the turning point was some research into Spotify. You know, not to go on a long dissertation on that, but the streaming services that exist are a scam. I'll just put it that way. I mean, there was Nipsey Hussle, a hip hop artist who was tragically murdered, posted some information. He had about his sales through Spotify, and he had a million hits, a million streams, and he made less than $4,000. Okay, so the odds of anybody in the collective getting close to a million streams is pretty much zero.
Yeah.
And when so many people listen to music now through streaming services, and they believe, and understandably so, that if they're paying for a subscription, they believe that money is going to the musicians. And the flat out truth is it's not.
And what
I mean,
about
if a million,
platforms like Bandcamp, for instance?
yeah, but Bandcamp's totally different because it's not a streaming service. Like people buy recordings there, you know, physical copies and digital copies. Bandcamp, like that's why we work with Bandcamp. It's the best platform that I'm aware of, and you know, writers get paid well for doing articles for Bandcamp. I mean, Bandcamp's kind of extraordinary as a platform, but like Tidal and Spotify and whatnot, these services aren't paying musicians fairly. That's just the truth of it. So, okay, we're in a situation where like recordings, people buy, like when I used to tour, I would make more money than the fee on merch sales in the late 90s, early 2000s. So let's say I got a guarantee, I'll just make up a number, $500. I'd make $700 selling merch at that show. So that's a $1,200 show. That's not the case anymore. If we're lucky, we make a couple €100 at most shows, or a couple $100. So now you're talking 700 versus 1,200, and you're on tour and you're paying for all your expenses out of those fees. It's a brutal change economically. So that's just like one thing. And then everyone's listening to stuff by streaming, so the musicians aren't getting paid that way. So the selling of records, which is so key to income for musicians, is not really a viable way to survive. And if musicians all have to have day jobs in order to pay their bills, they have less and less time to devote to their work. So Catalytic really became a way to look at this problem. And because there was a group of people and a group of activity involved, I was like, okay, let's think about how do we start making money for people in different ways. And the manager, the previous manager, Brock Stuessy, he was the one who came up with the subscription platform. And like, we got to get subscribers. Now that sounds super obvious now, and the subscription platform we have at Catalytic has saved us, because everybody, you know, puts out records in different cycles, and there would be periods of like 2 months where we didn't have a new album by one of the members, one of the partners in the co-op. And we still had expenses. We were still shipping stuff. We were still, you know, so some money was coming in, but not a steady flow, because the new records are the ones that sell the best, obviously. The subscription service means that every month we have a flat rate of income, no matter what. And subscribers get a bunch of benefits for subscribing, like free records and whatnot. So there's definite benefits to being a subscriber, and part of that benefit comes to Catalytic because it's a steady cash flow. So the subscription thing that works for a group which is now 24 people going into July, that means that you can have a subscription as a band, but like if you subscribe, you're accessing material by a ton of different people. The catalog of recordings at Catalytic is huge now.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of underscore that point, like the most recent one I think was Matt Maneri, Ingebrigt Hocker-Flatten, and Kali Moberg, accordion player. The most is, you know, what an incredible album that, you know, you can't get right?
Right. Those artist albums have been going directly to subscribers only, and we're changing that. The back catalog. I mean, to go to an earlier part of our conversation, I don't know if that was recorded, but part of what we're faced with as a planet, but certainly what we're seeing in the United States with the movement for Black Lives, like this has to be maintained. The awareness of what's been happening with institutionalized racism in the United States has to be addressed on a permanent level. So part of what we're trying to do at Catalytic is take something that's a cooperative to support the work of the musicians, generate income, particularly now where people don't have concerts, finding ways to do that, but also trying to support causes that we believe in on an ongoing level. And the thing that's worked best, as we learned definitely with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund fundraising album we made on Juneteenth, we raised a couple $1,000s for them, and that was because it was a new collection of recordings by the artists, and that, like, people connect with that. So fans of these musicians, fans of this music, can buy a recording and help support a cause. So these back recordings of the catalog artist album series, we're going to make those available to the public. We just made the first one available on Friday, and that was a recording by Caffeine that only subscribing members got before. But now people can buy these, and all of the income made from those purchases goes to different causes. The first one goes to One DC, an organization that Luke Stewart recommended. And every week, another one of these records is going to become available to the public, and those purchases of that particular record will continue to go to like another cause. So we're mixing those two things together, and members will still get them for free if they subscribe. So it's a way, and the musicians get paid for each album a flat rate. So the musicians are making money. We're helping raise money for causes that are really important to keep in the public eye and maintain and assist. And the musicians are getting paid for this work too. So that's like an ideal scenario that wouldn't be possible without a cooperative situation that we've got. And I think that those kinds of models are things that are generated through conversations with the people involved. They're all super smart. I mean, not just great musicians, but super forward-thinking people. And that has been a very galvanizing thing for me. The amount I've learned from the musicians, not just through their own work, but also translating that information to the fans. Like, so we have a quarterly periodical that comes out that includes, articles written by members of the co-op, photography. Every musician I know has other passions that are connected to music that inform their music. And so part of the thing is that, okay, we've moved from being an online record store to a platform to disseminate information and music and creativity, everything that these people are doing, all 24 of them, and getting it out to people to let them know it's a bigger picture. Yeah. And the next big project, in addition to the festival, which involves everybody, that's taking place this weekend, is we've figured out a way to do a streaming service that will actually pay the musicians. And we're hoping that'll be available in July. We're at the very, very tail end of the technical aspect of it. But basically, that's a huge thing for me. Like, symbolically, the whole thing that turned the platform into more of a collective consciousness for me was triggered by streaming services and the frank injustice of paying. The people who provide the content are not being paid for that content. They're using the model of social media. Facebook doesn't generate content. It sells advertising and information by people who create the content. And that's the same thing with the streaming services, to be honest. I mean, Spotify has offices in downtown Manhattan that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in rent, and they don't pay the musicians. I mean, there's a few people at the top of the pile that probably get some money. But basically, if Nipsey Hussle made $4,000 on 1 million streams, no one's really getting paid. And certainly musicians in this field are not getting paid. Yeah. So creating a streaming service that actually pays the musicians is a huge thing for me. And it's symbolic, because if we can do it, other musicians can do it. And we could not do a streaming service if we didn't have 24 people partner into the collective, because we have albums from 24 different artists. If you're a single person, even if you're prolific, you've got a limited amount of content that you could make available. So a streaming service isn't really maybe possible or, yeah, feasible in a way that would be viable economically. But because we have a pool of creative people working together and access to these recordings that are already available digitally, and then we can create a streaming service with that content and then pay the musicians fairly for that. That to me is a huge thing. So so Catalytic really has changed from, okay, it's an online record store with like 5 artists to a real creative cooperative trying to find new ways to make income for people who make creative music, experimental music, improvised music. And now, like, we were already working on this stuff when COVID hit. So we were able to look at what was happening and say, okay, what do we do differently to get more money to people? So, for example, we changed the payouts for the subscriptions to the musicians, so the musicians got more money and the business got less. You know, we've been doing other things like that to make sure that as much income as possible is going to the musicians now when they don't have gigs.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
we will have to
hmm?
stop in a few minutes.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just go and go.
I think it's clear that I think the current situation also offers some opportunities and creative thinking that goes beyond the creativity that you already had with Catalytic Sound to look at alternative ways of making money.
It's almost like being a discontent content provider makes you a better provider of your contentment.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the people involved are all problem solvers. I mean, one of the conditions of doing music on the margins is you have to figure out how to survive doing it, you know, and that means solving a lot of problems. You know, I mean, it didn't surprise me. It was amazing, and I was inspired, no question. But it didn't really surprise me that Experimental Sound Studio came up with a quarantine concert idea so fast.
Right.
You know, they're an institution that's always trying to figure out how to solve problems to generate income to maintain its activities. And all the musicians at Catalytic individually are like that. So when you pool that set of resources and knowledge and experience with people that are always solving problems, not just problems in their music, creative problems and challenges, but economic survival problems and challenges. So like talking to people now and wondering what the future of music is going to look like is a fascinating, on one hand, fascinating discussion. On the other hand, it's hard to look at what's down the line because there's so many questions still. I mean, I've got organizers in Europe who want to know if I'm coming to do tours that were planned in the autumn, and I'm having those conversations. But you know, right now you can't fly to Europe. Yep. I mean, even if you had the money for a ticket, they're not accepting people from the U.S. And let's say they do, are you going to then be quarantined for 2 weeks before you can go anywhere? And how are you going to do that economically? Right. You know, so it's like all these questions. So like seeing that, you know, talking about bars and finding out what the BIM House is doing is very informative. Is that going to be the model, the way things are going to go for the next 2 years? I mean, how are people going to go to concerts? I mean, are they going to test everyone's temperature? I mean, how many people can go to a show? I mean, a lot of the concerts we do are at smaller clubs that hold like 100 people. Yeah. If they can only have a third of the audience in there, you have 30 people. And even if you clear out the room, you have a total of 60 people. What are you going to charge for tickets? How is the venue going to sustain itself? How are they going to pay the musicians?
And that's where initiatives like your festival can offer an alternative for the time being. How many people do you expect? Do you have any idea on expectations?
No. I mean, we can guess. The Sequester Fest that I played on, that John Corbett and Jim Dempsey of the Corbett versus Dempsey Gallery organized, I think there were like 500 people tuning in. And based on the lineups and the different material going, I feel like pretty confident that we can do something similar to that, and I think even more because there's really a focus to make it available for European audiences. That's why we have like 2 halves to each day. So that's a huge thing. Like if we can access that crowd, who are the people that follow the music too. I mean, huge part of my audience is based in the
Fantastic.
EU.
We'll
Yeah.
try to do our bit to promote it.
Okay, thanks.
I think we'll have to wrap it up
Okay,
here.
okay.
Because I think, I don't know, Paul, whether you have any additional thoughts or questions?
No, I'd say Ken did a pretty good job interviewing. You really covered all my questions. I was very much interested, and I'm glad you discussed the sort of the I don't know what we call it, political work that Catalytic Sound is doing. I think that's really really fascinating.
Well, I think what the circumstances that we're in now, I mean, music has always existed in a context. And the context that we're in now, speaking about the United States, is so extreme and so challenging that I think that it's essential to kind of work with what you do and support things that are important to you in terms of causes and whatnot. And it makes sense, like, creating recordings that go for sale and support causes that the cooperative believes in, and finding new ones that are different, located in different areas in the US and in Europe, is a way of using music without changing. I mean, everyone approaches their creative work differently, and some people are motivated by politics to create amazing work. And like, for myself, I make the work, and then let's see what I do with it, So like, for me, I'm wary of creating something that's didactic and preachy, but taking that work and saying, hey, these record sales, like the duo record with Fred, for example, that music, the sales of those recordings, that recording is going to go to the library, African American library based in Fred's hometown, to help support their work. And that's like a very functional and effective means, from my point of view, of using music for a really important thing. And I think in the context we're in, talking about these things, representing important activity, getting information out to people is part of what we should be doing too, and not, quote unquote, only being a musician, and that's what I do. Okay. The context is so extreme right now, and there's really not time to be privileged to just say, I'm an artist. It's like, be an artist and be a person that empathizes and works with a community to make changes that you want. And you can do both, and we should do both. And I think that that's an exciting aspect of the way Catalytic has shifted during this very extreme period. We found new ways to support the artists. We've gotten behind causes that are political and essential and that need to be discussed and supported. And it all makes sense. It's not disingenuous. It's actual. It's coming from the real spirit of the people involved. We've had many, many discussions within the group about how we should approach things, how we should do things differently, how we should be more inclusive and diversify and articulate ideas. And it's been very powerful and really galvanizing, and really makes me believe in even more in what we're doing as a group, and why a group like this is just an example of how it can be done. I think it would be incredible if communities of artists, like all the people in Catalytic, almost all of us have worked together. That's how it started. We're all people who collaborate, and there have been people like, some people don't play as much with so-and-so as so-and-so, but basically it's a pool of people who know each other and work together. And there are communities like that all throughout all kinds of music. Right. And I think musicians working together to find solutions to keep the music happening, even in a period like this where there aren't concerts, it's a powerful thing to be doing. It's like, it's an indicator that it can be done. And I hope, and one of the things we're going to do, like in an upcoming issue of the Quarterly, is to talk to all the musicians in the cooperative and discuss the idea of self-determination. Like, how do we do this and get that information, like things that we do at Catalytic, but what people like Terry X have been doing for decades, to create ways for that band to continue working. And the environment is always changing, and then you have COVID on top of it, so all of these things, I think discussing them and getting that information out to fans, but also musicians, to say, hey, let's work together to overcome the things that are actually preventing us from continuing, making it harder for us to continue. You know, you can't do that on your own. You got to do it with other people.
Ken, we'll have to stop here.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Thanks a lot for talking with me. I appreciate it.
No, I think it's been a very great discussion, and I think it's great what you've set up, both with Catalytic, the concept behind it, the collaboration, the collaborative aspect with the other musicians, and the festival.
Yeah, great.
So
Thank you.
Really look forward to that.
Great.
I think we'll have to wrap it up here. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the great initiative. Paul, maybe last word from you.
Well, just to echo that. Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate you working with us to get through the time zone issues and all that, all that good stuff to set this up. It's a pleasure to speak with you and to see you. Hopefully, we'll catch you live again at some point.
Yeah, in Brussels and Berlin. I got my fingers crossed.
So and yeah, so appreciate it.
Good luck in the weekend. Thanks.
Yeah. Take care.
Thanks
Thanks very much, guys.